On Christmas morning, my parents handed my sister a fully paid house deed, then told me, "She needs it more, you'll understand someday." I stayed silent until Dad opened my gift and his face went pale. Christmas morning came with the exact same rituals it always did, wrapped in a suffocating layer of forced cheer and unsaid resentments. I had made the 4-hour drive from my tiny apartment in the city, waking up before the sun even considered rising just to beat the holiday traffic. My car heater was barely working, blowing a weak stream of lukewarm air against my freezing hands, but the physical cold was nothing compared to the chill of walking into my parents' house. It was a beautiful, sprawling suburban home. The kind with a perfectly manicured lawn, a wraparound porch, and windows that always seemed to reflect a picture-perfect family life to the outside world. Gregory, my father, insisted on edging the driveway with a ruler and hedge clippers even in the dead of winter. When I finally pushed the heavy oak front door open, the smell hit me first. It was my mother Brenda's signature scent for the holidays, cinnamon rolls burning just slightly at the edges, mixed with the sharp, artificial pine of a heavily sprayed wreath. The fireplace was roaring. Gregory insisted it be lit, throwing logs onto the flames even though the thermostat was already set to an uncomfortable 72 degrees. The air in the room felt thick, dry, and heavy, making it hard to take a full breath. "Cassidy, you made it," Brenda called out from the kitchen. She wore her velvet red robe like a queen opening court. She didn't rush over to hug me. She just offered a tight, glossy smile and immediately went back to adjusting a platter of pastries that didn't need adjusting. Gregory was standing by the mantel with his usual mug of black coffee, his eyes scanning the living room like a retail manager doing inventory. He gave me a single, firm nod. That was my greeting. "No, we missed you, no, how was the drive?" Just a nod that acknowledged my physical presence in the room. I was 28 years old, entirely self-sufficient, living on my own, paying my own bills, and fighting my own battles. Yet, stepping into this house instantly reduced me to an invisible piece of furniture. I took off my coat, hung it in the hall closet, and positioned myself in the armchair near the corner of the room. I was the spectator. I had always been the spectator. We were waiting for Bianca, of course. My sister, younger by 2 years, but treated as if she were the fragile, precious firstborn of royalty. Bianca was 26, constantly bouncing between failed business ventures and brief stints of finding herself, all heavily funded by the bank of Mom and Dad. She lived 30 minutes away, yet she was currently an hour and a half late. This was by design. Bianca always arrived just late enough to ensure an audience was waiting, just late enough to be adored the moment she crossed the threshold. When the front door finally swung open again, the energy in the house shifted entirely. The air crackled. Brenda literally dropped her oven mitts. Gregory put his coffee down. Bianca swept into the room in a flawless, cream-colored cashmere sweater set, her hair perfectly blown out, carrying a few shopping bags as if she had just returned from conquering Paris. "I am so sorry. The traffic was an absolute nightmare," Bianca said, projecting her voice so it filled every corner of the house. She dropped her bags and threw her arms open. Brenda rushed to hug her, kissing her cheek and fussing over how cold her hands were. Gregory actually smiled, a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and patted her on the shoulder. I watched the performance from my corner, sipping a cup of tap water because no one had offered me coffee. The Christmas tree blinked next to me, strung with those same gold bulbs from our childhood. I could trace every crack in the ornaments, every chip on the ceramic reindeer flaws we'd never mention, just like the glaring flaws in this family dynamic. Tradition itself required silence. I sat there, invisible, watching my parents orbit around my sister like she was the sun, bracing myself for the gift exchange that I knew, deep down, would be a painful reminder of exactly where I stood. The gift exchange in our house was never about the items themselves, it was about the theater. It was about Brenda getting to play the role of the ultimate provider and Gregory getting to play the silent, generous patriarch. We gathered around the massive tree. The carpet was covered in torn wrapping paper, shiny ribbons, and expensive boxes. Bianca had already opened a designer handbag, letting out one of her signature, high-pitched gasps before she had even fully touched the leather. That gasp was her true gift to our parents. She had been doing it since we were kids, reacting to every present like life itself was an audition for a Hallmark movie. Then, the atmosphere shifted. Brenda exchanged a meaningful, almost trembling look with Gregory. The casual tearing of paper stopped. Brenda reached deep into the branches of the tree and pulled out a small, flat box wrapped in gold paper with a thick satin ribbon. It wasn't a large box, but the way she held it with both hands, her voice catching slightly in her throat, told me this was the main event. She turned to Bianca, her golden child. "Open it," Brenda beamed, her cheeks flushed pink. Bianca peeled the paper back slowly, savoring the attention, drawing out the suspense. Inside the wrapping was a heavy, dark velvet box. She snapped the lid open. I expected jewelry. A diamond necklace, maybe the keys to a new luxury car. But there was no metal shining under the fairy lights. It was just a thick stack of folded, official-looking documents. Bianca frowned for a split second, clearly confused by the paperwork, before pulling the documents out. She read the first page. Her mouth dropped open, completely abandoning her rehearsed gasp for a look of genuine, unfiltered shock. "Mom, Dad, is this?" Bianca stammered, looking up at them with wide eyes. "We bought it," Gregory said, his chest puffing out with pride. "Outright." "It's the deed, honey," Brenda said, stepping forward to clasp her hands together. "The 3-bedroom townhome in the Arts District. The one you said you loved last month. It's fully paid for. No mortgage, no rent, no stress. It's completely yours. A fresh start for your new lifestyle brand." The room seemed to freeze. I stopped breathing for a second. A house. They had bought her a fully paid house. Not a down payment. Not a cosign on a lease. An entire piece of real estate, bought and paid for in cash, handed over in a velvet box on a Tuesday morning. The sheer financial magnitude of it hit me like a physical blow. Hundreds of thousands of dollars wiped clean just to make sure Bianca didn't have to face the adult reality of paying a monthly bill. Bianca threw her arms around both of them, bursting into loud, dramatic tears. "I can't believe this. You guys are the best parents in the entire world. Oh my God, the reading nook. The granite countertops." She was practically screaming, holding the deed against her chest like it was a shield against the real world. I sat completely still. I didn't scowl, I didn't sigh. I just watched. Muscle memory kept my face perfectly neutral. Brenda pulled away from the hug, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She looked over Bianca's shoulder, her eyes locking onto mine across the room. The smile on her face didn't fade, but her expression hardened into something defensive, almost challenging. She knew what this looked like. She knew exactly what she was doing. She took a step toward me, lowering her voice just enough so it sounded intimate, but loud enough for the room to hear. "Cassidy," Brenda said, her tone dripping with that syrupy, fake sympathy she used when she was about to say something cruel. "I know this seems like a lot, but your sister is going through a transitional phase with her business. She needs the stability. She needs it more than you do right now. You'll understand someday. You will understand someday." The words hung in the dry air of the living room. I already understood. I understood perfectly. They weren't giving her a house because she was working hard. They were giving her a house because they believed she was incapable of surviving without them, and they were giving me nothing because they knew I would survive regardless. The applause and the tears over the townhome eventually faded into a low hum of excited chatter. Bianca was already on her phone, taking aesthetic photos of the deed against the backdrop of the Christmas tree, probably drafting a lengthy social media post about being a self-made homeowner. I remained in my armchair, feeling the texture of the upholstery beneath my fingertips, grounding myself in the physical reality of the room so I wouldn't let the anger show. Showing anger meant they won. Showing hurt meant I cared. Right then, Gregory said, clearing his throat and breaking away from the celebration. He walked over to the side table, picked up something flat, and walked toward me. There was no gold wrapping paper. There was no satin ribbon. There was no breathless anticipation from Brenda. Gregory handed me a plain, unmarked white envelope. He handed it to me with the exact same energy he used when passing a utility bill across the kitchen counter. He didn't look me in the eye. He didn't offer a warm smile. "Here you go," he muttered, already turning his back to walk toward the kitchen for a coffee refill. No ceremony. No applause. Just the sound of paper brushing against fabric. The envelope sat in my lap like something fragile and vaguely humiliating. It was a physical manifestation of my worth in this family. A reminder not just of what I lacked, but of how far they would go to make that lack feel entirely normal. Meanwhile, Bianca was still squealing about French doors and walk-in closets. I ran my finger along the flap of the envelope. I didn't want to open it. Before I even broke the seal, I already knew what it meant. It meant they saw me the exact same way they always had, as the utility player, the background character, the one who didn't require maintenance or affection. I slid my finger under the paper and tore it open. The sound was sharp, slicing through the background noise of Bianca's excitement. Inside, there was no card. There was no money. There was only a single, neatly folded sheet of standard printer paper. I unfolded it carefully. It was a printout of an online job listing. The position was for an administrative assistant role at a regional insurance office located about 20 miles from my current apartment. I scanned the text. Entry level. Hourly wage. Minimum benefits. It was a job that paid significantly less than what I was currently making at the logistics firm where I had worked my way up for 3 years. Near the bottom of the page, in ink that was unmistakably Gregory's sharp, aggressive block letters, all pressure and control, he had scrawled a single sentence. "Thought this might be more your speed." I stared at the page without blinking. My fingers felt numb, the cold from the car ride suddenly rushing back into my veins. They had just handed my sister a fully paid deed to a house worth $500,000, and they had handed me a suggestion to take a minimum wage job because they thought my current life was a struggle. It wasn't just neglect, it was an insult. It was absolute, undeniable contempt masquerading as parental advice. No one noticed my silence. Bianca was loudly debating paint colors with Brenda. Gregory was stirring sugar into his mug, the clinking of the spoon echoing loudly in my ears. I let the paper fall back into the envelope. I folded the envelope twice, pressing the creases down hard, and then slid it under my leg. I didn't hide it out of shame. I hid it just to end the moment. The room was full of noise, but none of it reached me. All I could hear was the sound of that envelope scraping against itself, thin paper over thin paper, like a ghost whispering that I would never belong here the way she did. They hadn't given me less because they forgot. They gave me less because they believed I needed less, because I had always figured it out. I paid my own rent. I packed my own boxes. I picked up the phone myself when the school nurse called. I took out my own student loans and worked double shifts to pay them back. I looked at my watch. It was 10 in the morning. I stood up smoothly, smoothing the hem of my sweater. "I have to head back," I said, my voice steady, betraying absolutely nothing. "Work calls." I didn't wait for an argument, and thankfully, they didn't offer one. The drive back to my apartment was agonizingly quiet. The snow had started to fall, dusting the highway in a thin layer of white. I kept the radio off. I needed the silence, even though the silence left me alone with the memories that the white envelope had violently dragged to the surface. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white, trying to process the absolute confidence with which they had delivered that insult. They weren't being intentionally evil. They were just being remarkably, brutally consistent. This wasn't a sudden shift in their behavior. The architecture of their favoritism had been built brick by brick over decades. I stared at the road ahead, but my mind pulled me back to a kitchen that smelled like burnt vegetable oil. I was 9 years old. It was the morning of my birthday. I had woken up early, buzzing with that pure, unfiltered hope that only children possess. I thought maybe, just maybe, there would be a banner in the kitchen. Maybe a small stack of presents on the table. A card. Something. Anything to prove the day was mine. I crept downstairs in my pajamas. The kitchen was entirely empty. There were no balloons. There were no presents. There was only the faint smell of old coffee and a sticky note on the counter reminding Gregory to take out the trash. From the next room, I could hear Brenda humming softly to herself, followed by the sound of a hairbrush pulling through Bianca's thick hair. Bianca had a ballet rehearsal that morning, and getting her bun perfectly smooth was a 2-hour military operation. I didn't cry. Even at 9, I knew crying wouldn't bring the balloons. Instead, I pulled a stool over to the counter, dragged a box of cheap chocolate cake mix from the pantry, and decided to bake my own birthday cupcakes. I couldn't reach the heavy glass measuring cups, so I guessed the amounts. I poured too much oil into the bowl. I cracked an egg and left half the shell in the batter. I stirred it with a wooden spoon until my arm ached. When I finally put the tray into the oven, Brenda walked in. She didn't apologize for forgetting. She didn't say happy birthday. She just frowned, wrinkled her nose, and said, "Make sure you clean up that mess, Cassidy. Your sister doesn't want her dance bag smelling like burnt chocolate." The cupcakes came out flat, greasy, and dense. I sat on the floor by the oven, eating one in silence, chewing on the gritty texture of unmixed sugar and failure. Later that exact same year, Bianca turned 7. Her birthday didn't just have a cake, it had a theme. Brenda spent 3 weeks planning a backyard extravaganza. She rented 2 actual, living ponies to walk around our suburban lawn. She hired a face painter. She invited 50 people, including neighbors we actively disliked, just so they could come bearing glittery presents and shower compliments on a child who was already drowning in them. I remembered standing on the porch, holding a paper plate of expensive catering food, watching Bianca sit on a pony while Gregory snapped dozens of photos with a massive camera. The sun was shining on her. The entire world seemed to pivot on her smile. No one asked me to get in the photo. No one asked me if I wanted to turn on the pony. I was just the background extra in the movie of Bianca's life. That was the first time I fully understood the currency of our household. Love wasn't unconditional. It was allocated. And the budget for me had run dry a long time ago. Driving down the highway now, nearly 20 years later, the taste of those burnt, oily cupcakes seemed to linger in the back of my throat. The fully paid house deed was just the pony party, scaled up for inflation. The snow was coming down harder now, forcing me to slow my car to a cautious crawl. The rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers sounded like a ticking clock, counting down the years of my life spent trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. By the time I hit middle school, the dynamic was fully cemented. I had stopped expecting spontaneous affection. I realized early on that if I wanted any recognition, I had to extract it through undeniable, objective achievement. If they wouldn't love me for who I was, I would make them respect me for what I could do. That strategy peaked during my freshman year of high school. The state science fair. I didn't just do a baking soda volcano. I spent 3 months in the school library and our damp garage building a fully functional scale model of a hydroelectric dam. I wired the miniature turbines myself. I calculated water pressure flow rates until my eyes blurred. My fingers were covered in superglue burns and tiny cuts from stripping electrical wires. The day of the state finals, the gymnasium smelled of floor wax and nervous sweat. There were hundreds of kids, but my project stood out. The judges spent 20 minutes at my table, asking complex questions about renewable energy outputs. I answered every single one perfectly. I knew I had won before they even announced it. I looked eagerly toward the bleachers. I had begged my parents to come. Brenda had declined entirely, saying she needed to take Bianca to a dermatologist appointment. Gregory had promised to be there. When they called my name over the loudspeakers for first place in the state, a massive achievement that came with a plaque and a small grant for the school, I walked to the podium with my heart hammering against my ribs. I scanned the crowd. I looked for Gregory's familiar coat. He wasn't there. Later, I found out he had showed up 15 minutes late, glanced at a few tables near the entrance, decided it was too crowded, and left to make a golf tee time with a local business partner. He didn't even wait for the award ceremony. When I brought the heavy wooden plaque home and placed it on the kitchen island, he gave it a passing glance, patted my shoulder absent-mindedly, and said, "Good job, kiddo. Put that away before dinner." It was never displayed. It ended up in a cardboard box under my bed. The contrast of that memory burned the most when I compared it to what happened exactly 1 week later. Bianca had been taking acting classes, paid for by Gregory, of course. She went to an open casting call at a local mall and ended up landing a background role in a regional shampoo commercial. It wasn't a speaking part. She was literally just a girl in the background of a coffee shop scene, tossing her hair over her shoulder for exactly 2.5 seconds while the main actress delivered the lines. The day the commercial aired on local television, our house transformed into a festival. Brenda spent hundreds of dollars on catering. She invited aunts, uncles, and family friends. When the 30-second ad finally played during the evening news, the living room erupted into applause. Gregory popped a bottle of expensive champagne. He poured glasses for everyone, raising his crystal flute high in the air. To Bianca, he declared, his voice thick with emotion. A star in the making. We always knew you were destined for greatness. Brenda actually had the television paused on the blurry, wide-shot frame where Bianca was visible. She took a picture of the TV screen and framed it. A framed photo of a television commercial sat on our mantle for the next 5 years. My state science fair plaque remained in the dark under my mattress. I pressed my foot slightly harder on the gas pedal, the memory fueling a dark, quiet rage inside my chest. I hadn't asked for champagne. I hadn't asked for a party. I just wanted them to look at me the way they looked at a blurry 30-second advertisement. But favoritism is deaf. It only hears what it wants to celebrate. The final piece of the foundation, the moment that truly severed my emotional dependency on them, happened during my senior year of high school. If the science fair was a lesson in apathy, graduation was a masterclass in cruelty. I had spent my entire high school career operating on a terrifying deficit of sleep. While Bianca was doing cheerleading and going to weekend retreats, I was juggling a full academic load with 2 part-time jobs. I worked retail at a clothing store on weekends, folding sweaters until my hands cramped, and I waitressed at a local diner 3 nights a week. Every single dollar went into a savings account for college because Brenda had made it casually clear over dinner one night that they wouldn't be able to swing 2 tuitions, and since Bianca needed a private arts college to nurture her talent, I was on my own. I didn't complain. I put my head down and worked brutally, violently hard. I maintained a perfect 4.0 grade average. I wrote college admission essays on the back of receipt paper during my breaks at the diner. I pushed myself to the absolute edge of physical and mental exhaustion. It paid off. Academic awards night was held in the massive, brightly lit school auditorium. I had received a letter informing me I was receiving a scholarship, but I didn't know which one. I forced my parents to attend. They sat in the front row, not because they were eager, but because Gregory liked the legroom. About halfway through the ceremony, the principal stepped up to the microphone. He began talking about a specific student. A student who exemplified resilience, outstanding academic merit, and an unstoppable work ethic. He announced the highest financial award the district offered, a full-ride academic scholarship heavily funded by local alumni. This year's recipient is Cassidy, the principal announced. The auditorium erupted. My teachers, my friends, the parents of kids I had tutored, they all stood up. It was a massive, deafening wave of applause. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. I felt validated. I walked down the aisle toward the stage, my knees shaking slightly, a genuine, wide smile breaking across my face. As I walked up the steps to the stage, I looked down at the front row. I wanted to see my mother's face. I wanted to see, just for 1 second, that she was proud of the daughter who had literally worked herself to the bone to succeed. Brenda wasn't clapping. Her hands were in her lap, holding her smartphone. She was swiping through social media, the blue light of the screen illuminating her bored expression. Gregory was clapping, but it was a slow, obligatory golf clap, his eyes darting toward the exit signs. I stood on the stage, the heavy certificate warm in my hands, posing for a picture for the school yearbook. As I stepped down and walked past the front row to return to my seat, the applause began to die down into a quiet murmur. In that brief pocket of silence, Brenda looked up from her phone. She turned to the mother sitting next to her, a woman we barely knew, and let out a short, dismissive sigh. "Well," Brenda said, her voice carrying clearly over the rustling of the crowd. "At least she's good at something." That one sentence sliced through the remnants of the applause like a serrated kitchen knife. At least she's good at something. It wasn't pride. It was a backhanded dismissal. It was a way of minimizing my entire existence, reducing years of grinding labor into a lucky trick performed by a dog. I parked my car in the small, cramped lot behind my apartment building. The snow had stopped, leaving the city frozen and quiet. I turned off the engine and sat in the cold for a long time. I realized something profound as I stared at the frost forming on the glass. Favoritism doesn't whisper. It carves. It carves itself into holidays and dinners and all the moments where love is supposed to be loudest. Watching Bianca hold a $500,000 house deed this morning while I held a minimum wage job clipping wasn't a shock. It was just the final brick in the wall. I knew exactly where I stood. And as I grabbed my keys and walked up the freezing stairs to my apartment, I knew something else too. I was done waiting for them to change. If you're following the story and empathize with what Cassidy is going through, please hit the like button on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next incredibly dramatic part. Don't forget to leave a comment with the name of the city you live in below. Every like, subscribe, and comment helps the video reach more people. Thank you so much. What will the future hold for this family when their secret is revealed? We'll find out together. Months crawled by after that disastrous Christmas. I threw myself into my work at the logistics firm, taking every overtime shift available, volunteering for the weekend rotations that everyone else hated. I wanted my bank account to grow, but more than that, I wanted my mind to stay occupied. If I was busy tracking shipping containers and calculating fuel surcharges, I didn't have to think about the gold-wrapped box sitting in Bianca's new living room or the white envelope hidden in the back of my junk drawer. I had effectively ghosted my parents, responding to their texts with one-word answers or claims of being under a deadline. But as spring began to thaw the city, the guilt-tripping began in earnest. It started with Brenda's check-in calls, which were really just tactical reconnaissance missions. She'd talk for 20 minutes about the color palette Bianca was choosing for her guest bathroom, waiting for me to sound bitter. When I didn't, she switched gears. The tone of her voice would drop an octave, becoming hushed and heavy with performative sorrow. "Cassidy," she had sighed during a call on a Tuesday evening, the sound of her wine glass clinking in the background. "Your father is really not himself. He took a nasty spill in the garage trying to reach those heavy storage bins on the top shelf. You know how he is. He refuses to admit he's getting older. He's been limping for 3 days, and his back is completely shot." I felt that familiar, cold knot of obligation tightening in my chest. "Where's Bianca?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Oh, you know your sister," Brenda said, her voice instantly brightening. "Her new lifestyle branding podcast is finally taking off. She's in the middle of a 3-city tour for some influencer networking events. She's just so exhausted, poor thing. We couldn't possibly ask her to come help with manual labor." The implication was loud and clear. I was the manual laborer. I was the one whose time was less valuable, whose presence was only required when there was heavy lifting to be done. Brenda spent another 10 minutes explaining how hurt Gregory was that I hadn't visited, weaving a narrative where I was the cold, distant daughter punishing them for no reason. She used words like family duty and honor, wrapping them in a syrupy layer of unspoken accusation. Against my better judgment, I agreed to drive down for the weekend. The 4-hour trip felt like an eternity. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same, taut, perfect, and deeply dishonest. Gregory was standing by the porch, and for someone with a shot back, he seemed to be moving with remarkable agility while he critiqued the way the neighbor was mowing their lawn. "You're late," was the first thing he said to me. No hug. No, "It's good to see you." Just a time-stamped complaint. The rest of the day was a grueling cycle of lifting boxes, scrubbing shelving units in the garage, and listening to Brenda narrate Bianca's life as if she were a royal correspondent. By the time dinner rolled around, a dry roast that tasted like cardboard, my patience was paper thin. Every topic of conversation was a trap. If I talked about my promotion, Brenda would interrupt to ask if I'd heard about the celebrity who had liked one of Bianca's posts. If I mentioned my car needing a new alternator, Gregory would remind me that if I had taken that insurance job he suggested, I'd have more stability. By 10 o'clock that night, I couldn't stay in that house for one more second without screaming. I retreated to my childhood bedroom, but the walls felt like they were vibrating with decades of swallowed arguments. The trophies on my shelf, the science fair plaque, the academic medals, looked like dust-covered relics of a girl who had tried too hard to be seen. I decided to head to the kitchen for a glass of water, hoping to clear my head before trying to sleep. The house was deathly quiet as I crept down the stairs, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer, a sound that usually felt comforting, but tonight felt like a countdown. I was halfway to the kitchen when I noticed something that made me stop dead in my tracks. A sliver of warm, yellow light was spilling out from under the door of Gregory's home office. That office was the inner sanctum of our house. As kids, Bianca and I were strictly forbidden from even touching the brass handle. Gregory kept it locked like a government vault, claiming his private business records and sensitive client data required absolute security. He was a man who lived for control, and that room was the center of his command. But tonight, the door wasn't just unlocked, it was slightly ajar. A wave of intense curiosity, fueled by months of suppressed resentment, washed over me. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs so loudly I was sure Brenda would hear it from the master suite. I told myself to walk away. I told myself that snooping was beneath me, that I didn't care what was in that room. But then I remembered the gold box. I remembered the white envelope. I remembered the way they looked at Bianca with a reverence they never reserved for me. I pushed the door open, the hinges giving a faint, oily groan. The office smelled of old leather, expensive tobacco, and that sharp, ozone scent of a laser printer. Gregory's desk was a massive slab of mahogany, perfectly organized. I scanned the room, expecting to see some sign of the important business that kept him occupied for hours on end. Instead, my eyes were drawn to the corner behind his file cabinet. A small, gray digital safe sat tucked away, its heavy door hanging loose. Gregory, the man who prided himself on being the ultimate protector of family secrets, had forgotten to spin the dial after his last access. This felt like more than a mistake, it felt like an invitation. I knelt on the floor, my knees clicking in the silence. My hands were shaking as I reached into the dark interior of the safe. My breath was coming in shallow gasps. Part of me expected an alarm to go off, for Gregory to burst in and demand to know what I was doing. But the house remained silent. I pulled out a stack of manila folders. They were all perfectly labeled in Gregory's sharp, aggressive block letters. Tax returns 2022, portfolio diversification, trust fund documents. My fingers brushed against a thick, cream-colored envelope at the bottom. It was heavier than the others. On the front, in handwriting that looked like it had been carved into the paper, were the words, "To be opened upon death." This was it. The will. The final statement of who mattered and who didn't. I knew I should put it back. I knew that looking at it was a betrayal of the highest order. But as I sat there in the dim light of the desk lamp, I realized my parents had betrayed me every single day of my life. I pulled the document out. I skipped past the legal jargon and the funeral instructions. I looked for the numbers. I looked for the names. What I found wasn't just a list of assets, it was the blueprint of a life I didn't even know I was living. As I turned the pages of the document, the air in the office felt like it was being sucked out of the room. This wasn't just a will. It was a comprehensive ledger of every financial move my parents had made over the last decade, and my name was everywhere. I found a deed for a residential property purchased 6 years ago. It wasn't the townhome they gave Bianca. It was a different address, a smaller house on the other side of the county. The owner listed on the deed wasn't Gregory or Brenda. It was me. My name, Cassidy, was printed in bold, official font. Below that was a signed authorization for a mortgage of $280,000. I stared at the signature. It was my name, but the handwriting was a grotesque imitation. The C was too loopy, the Y ended in a sharp, jagged tail that I never used. It was a forgery. A blatant, criminal forgery. My stomach turned over. I flipped through the next set of papers, bank statements for accounts I had never opened, linked to my social security number. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through these accounts, transfers labeled as business expenses and consulting fees. It took me a few minutes to connect the dots. They hadn't just bought Bianca a house, they had used my identity and my clean credit history to build a massive financial shield for their favorite child. But the most devastating discovery was tucked into a folder labeled Lake House Maintenance. I found a second mortgage agreement for the family's beloved lakefront retreat, the place where all our happy memories were supposed to live. 3 years ago, Gregory had taken out a loan of $350,000 against the lake house. The cosigner on the loan? Me. He had forged my signature again. The loan wasn't for home repairs or a new roof. Attached to the back of the agreement was a series of wire transfer receipts. The money had been sent directly to an account owned by Bianca's Radiant Skincare, the first of her many failed business ventures. He had gambled the family's most precious legacy on a business that everyone knew would fail, and he had used my future as the collateral. I sat on the floor, the cold mahogany of the desk pressing against my back, feeling like I was losing my mind. Every struggle I had faced, the 2 jobs in college, the nights I spent eating ramen so I could pay off my student loans, the car I couldn't afford to fix, it was all a lie. I had been wealthy on paper while struggling in reality, while my parents used my identity to fund Bianca's delusions of grandeur. And the worst part was the date on the latest bank notice. Because the skincare line had collapsed and Bianca was currently sinking money into her podcast, Gregory had stopped making payments on the secret lake house mortgage. The notice was from 6 weeks ago. It was a formal warning of default. The bank was preparing to move toward a foreclosure auction. They were going to lose the lake house. The one thing Gregory and Brenda valued more than anything else, their symbol of status and success, was about to be snatched away by a bank because of their own greed and favoritism. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers fumbling with the camera app. I photographed every single page, every forgery, every bank statement, every transfer receipt. My hands weren't shaking anymore, they were cold and steady. The anger had crystallized into something sharp and functional. I didn't want to cry. I didn't want to scream. I wanted to build a case. I carefully put every folder back exactly how I found it. I closed the safe door, leaving it just as ajar as it had been when I walked in. I crept back upstairs, my mind working at 1,000 miles an hour. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that for 28 years, I had been a character in a play they wrote. But tonight, I had stolen the script. And I was going to rewrite the ending. I left the next morning at 6 a.m., before anyone else was awake. I didn't leave a note. I just drove. The 4-hour trip back to the city felt like it lasted 20 minutes. My brain was a whirlwind of numbers, dates, and legal definitions. The moment I got into my apartment, I didn't even take off my shoes. I sat at my laptop and began the systematic process of pulling my entire digital identity apart. I started with a comprehensive credit report. When the file loaded, I felt a physical jolt of electricity run through my spine. My credit score, which I had worked so hard to keep in the high 700s, was beginning to dip. There were 4 credit cards I didn't recognize, all with 5-figure limits and all showing significant balances. The billing addresses were all my parents' home. Then I saw the mortgage for the lake house. It was listed as seriously delinquent. The sight of it made my vision blur. My own father had effectively sabotaged my ability to ever buy a home of my own, just to keep his golden child from feeling the sting of failure. I spent the next 3 days in a state of hyper-focused fury. I visited my local bank branch, sitting across from a young, nervous-looking teller. I told her I had lost track of some secondary accounts and needed full transaction histories. When she pulled up the records, she looked at me with a mixture of confusion and pity. "Ma'am," she said, her voice low. "There's a lot of activity here. Large transfers between this account and a trust fund. Are you sure you haven't been monitoring this? I've been occupied, I said, my voice tight. I watched as she printed out hundreds of pages of statements. Seeing the numbers in black and white was different than seeing them on a phone screen. It was real. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars of my wealth being siphoned off to pay for Bianca's designer clothes, her apartment in the city, and the very house they had given her for Christmas. They hadn't bought her a house with their money. They had bought it with debt they had strapped to my back. I felt a sudden, sharp memory of that Christmas morning. Brenda saying, "She needs it more, you'll understand someday." The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I understood now. I understood that I was the golden goose they were slowly starving to death while they fed the scraps to Bianca. I gathered the papers into a thick folder and called Daphne. Daphne had been my best friend since we were roommates in college. She was now a senior associate at a high-end law firm, specialized in white-collar financial disputes and estate law. She was the only person I trusted with this level of wreckage. "Cassidy," she said when she picked up. "It's 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. Everything okay? I need a lawyer, Daphne. A real one. And I need a friend who won't judge me for what I'm about to do." "Meet me at my office in an hour," she said, her tone instantly shifting to professional. "And bring everything." Walking into Daphne's office was like walking into a sanctuary of logic and law. The walls were lined with heavy books, and the air smelled of expensive espresso. I laid the folder on her desk. I didn't start with my feelings. I started with the numbers. I showed her the forgeries. I showed her the delinquency notices. I showed her the transfers to Bianca's business. Daphne looked through the papers in silence for nearly 20 minutes. I watched her face, waiting for the shock, the outrage. Instead, she just got quieter and quieter. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold and sharp. "Cassidy," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "This isn't just family drama. This is felony-level identity theft and mortgage fraud. You could have your father arrested by the end of the week if you wanted to." "I don't want him in jail," I said, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. "I want him to feel exactly what he's been making me feel for 28 years. I want him to realize he has no power over me. And I want the house." "The lake house?" Daphne asked, raising an eyebrow. "It's going to auction, isn't it?" Daphne nodded, pulling up a private real estate database on her second monitor. "In exactly 22 days. Foreclosure auction. They've already exhausted their grace periods. The bank wants their money, and they don't care who pays it." "Then I'm going to buy it," I said. "And I'm going to use the money they hid in those trust accounts to do it." Daphne stared at me for a long beat, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across her face. "You want to use the money they stole from you to buy back the property they mortgaged in your name?" "Is it legal?" I asked. "Technically." Daphne started tapping her pen against the desk. "The money in those trust accounts is legally yours. Your social security number is the primary on the account. Gregory put it there to hide it from his own business creditors, assuming you'd never look. Legally, you have every right to withdraw every cent of it today. And since the lake house is being sold at a public foreclosure auction, anyone with the cash can bid on it." She leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with the kind of tactical intensity that made her a terrifying litigator. "But we have to be smart. If you buy it under your own name, Gregory will see it on the public records immediately. He'll try to fight it, or worse, he'll try to guilt you into giving it back before the ink is even dry. We need to do this through a layer of armor." "A shell company?" I suggested. "Exactly. A limited liability company. We'll call it something generic. Heritage Holdings or Pinnacle Assets. I'll act as the registered agent and the authorized signer. To the bank and the public, it will look like a faceless investment group is buying a distressed property. Your parents will think they lost the house to a group of predatory developers. They'll be devastated, but they won't blame you. Not until we're ready for them to know." The plan was audacious, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of genuine excitement. It wasn't about the money. It was about the architecture of the revenge. I wanted to watch them mourn the loss of their status, to watch them realize that their favoritism had cost them the only thing they truly loved. "What about the forgeries?" I asked. "Do we just ignore them?" "For now," Daphne said. We'll keep them as our nuclear option. If Gregory tries to challenge the sale, or if he finds out it's you and starts making legal threats, we present the evidence of the forged signatures. We tell him he can either walk away quietly and let you keep the house, or he can explain those signatures to a grand jury. He's a proud man, Cassidy. He won't risk his reputation or his freedom. We spent the rest of the afternoon drafting the paperwork. It was a strange, empowering feeling to sign my name, my real signature, on documents that would dismantle my parents' world. We structured the LLC so that I was the sole member, but my name was nowhere on the public-facing documents. You're going to need a lot of cash for the auction deposit, Daphne warned. Foreclosure auctions are brutal. You need 10% down the day of the sale and the balance within 30 days. If we use the funds from those secret trust accounts, we can cover it. But we have to move fast before Gregory notices the balance has dropped. Do it, I said. Move it all. I walked out of Daphne's office into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time, the city didn't feel like a place I was hiding in. It felt like my territory. I went to a coffee shop, ordered an expensive latte, and sat by the window. I pulled up my parents' Facebook pages. Brenda had just posted a photo of the lake house with the caption, "Counting down the days until summer at our little slice of heaven." #family tradition, #blessed. I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a cold, hard satisfaction. The family tradition was about to end. And the blessing was about to be revoked. The next 2 weeks were a blur of high-stakes logistics. Daphne moved the money with surgical precision. We discovered that between the 3 secret accounts Gregory had opened in my name, there was a total of $412,000. It was more than enough to cover the outstanding mortgage and the legal fees. It was a bitter pill to swallow, realizing that while I was struggling to pay my heating bill in the winter, my parents were sitting on nearly $500,000 of my money. The day of the auction arrived on a Tuesday. It was a gray, drizzly morning, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavy and somber. The auction wasn't held at the lake house. It was held in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room at the county courthouse. I didn't go. Daphne insisted that I stay away to maintain the faceless investor persona. I sat in my apartment, my phone on the table in front of me, staring at the clock. Every second felt like an hour. I imagined Gregory and Brenda sitting at home, oblivious, or perhaps frantically trying to call the bank to beg for another extension. I felt a momentary pang of guilt, a ghost of the old Cassidy trying to protect them. But then I looked at the folder on my desk, the one with the forged signatures. The guilt vanished. At 1:15 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daphne. "We're in." 3 other bidders, mostly local house flippers. "The bidding is at $350,000. My heart was racing. "Go higher," I typed back. "Don't let them have it." 10 minutes later, $380,000. "The flippers are dropping out. Just one guy left." "Whatever it takes," I replied. The silence that followed was agonizing. I paced my small living room, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. I thought about the lake house. I thought about the way the sun set over the water, the way the wood of the dock felt warm under my feet. It was the only place I had ever felt a sense of peace, even if that peace was always interrupted by Brenda's demands. Finally, at 1:45, the phone rang. "Congratulations, Madam Landlord," Daphne said, her voice sounding triumphant over the crackle of the courthouse background noise. "Heritage Holdings LLC just bought a lake house for $405,000. The deed is being processed as we speak." I slumped into my chair, a long, shaky breath escaping my lungs. It was done. I owned it. The most precious piece of the family legacy was now legally mine, bought with the very money they had hidden from me. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Daphne said, "the bank is satisfied. They get their money and the foreclosure is canceled. But the title doesn't go back to your father. It goes to the LLC. We'll get the official paperwork in a week. I'll send a formal notice of ownership change to the property address. Your parents will get a letter informing them that their home has been sold and that any further occupancy is subject to the new owner's terms." "Don't send the letter yet," I said. "I want to deliver it myself." "Cassidy, are you sure? That's going to be a nuclear explosion." I know, I said, a calm, cold clarity settling over me. And I want to be there to see it. The next few weeks were the hardest part of the entire plan. I had to maintain the charade. I had to answer Brenda's texts about what kind of wine I was bringing for the summer kickoff party. I had to listen to Gregory brag about the improvements he was making to the boathouse. Every time they spoke, I felt like I was holding a live wire. I spent my weekends at the city library, researching property law and tenant rights. I wanted to make sure that when the moment came, I was untouchable. I looked at photos of the lake house online, but this time, they didn't make me feel small. They made me feel powerful. Gregory and Brenda were still acting like they owned the world, but they were living in a house of cards. And I was the wind. If you're following the story and feeling chills down your spine at Cassidy's calculated revenge, hit the like button now to support her. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the name of the city you live in. Your interaction is what motivates me to create more dramatic stories like this. What do you think Cassidy should do next? Leave your comments below. Christmas morning came again, a perfect, mocking mirror of the year before. The same rituals, the same smells, the same hollow laughter. I had made the drive down with a heavy, rectangular box sitting in my passenger seat. It wasn't wrapped in gold paper. It didn't have a satin ribbon. It was plain white, sealed with a single drop of red wax. When I walked into the house, Brenda was in her velvet red robe, presiding over the breakfast table like nothing had changed. "Cassidy, you're just in time for the rolls," she chirped, her eyes already scanning my hands for a gift. Bianca arrived an hour late, draped in a new cashmere coat that I knew for a fact had been paid for by one of the business accounts Gregory had forged my name on. She gave her signature gasp as she walked in, hugging everyone with a performative warmth that made my skin crawl. "Oh, I have so much to tell you guys," Bianca squealed, settling onto the sofa. "The podcast is doing amazing, and I'm thinking of buying a vacation home in Florida next year. Dad, you'll help with the paperwork, right?" Gregory chuckled, his chest swelling with pride. "Of course, honey. Anything you need." I sat in my usual corner, the silent observer. I felt like I was watching a movie I had already seen 100 times, but this time, I knew the projector was about to break. The gift exchange began. Bianca opened a designer handbag, another one, and cried right on cue. Brenda opened a set of diamond earrings from Gregory. There were toasts to family success and new beginnings. I watched them, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. "Your turn, Cassidy," Gregory said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of condescension. He pointed to the white box under the tree. "I hope you put more thought into it than that job clipping I gave you last year. You really need to start thinking about your future." "Oh, I've been thinking about nothing else, Dad," I said, my voice calm and clear. I stood up and handed the box to him. The room went quiet. There was something about the way I moved, a sudden, sharp authority that stopped the chatter. Gregory took the box, his brow furrowing. He broke the wax seal and pulled out the thick stack of papers inside. He read the first page. I watched the color drain from his face, starting at his forehead and moving down to his jaw until he looked like a ghost sitting in his own armchair. His hands began to tremble, the paper rustling like dry leaves. What is this?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "It's the deed to the lake house, Dad," I said. "The one you mortgaged in my name. The one you defaulted on. Heritage Holdings LLC bought it at auction 6 months ago. To settle the debt you created." Brenda leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the pages. I watched as her smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. "Heritage Holdings? Cassidy, what are you talking about? Who are these people?" "I am Heritage Holdings, Mom," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air out of the room. Bianca looked from face to face, her mouth hanging open, her designer handbag forgotten on the floor. You bought our house?" Brenda whispered, her voice cracking. "No," I corrected her. "I bought my house. The one you stole from me years ago. And I found the folders in the safe, Dad. I found the forged signatures. I have copies of every single one of them. My lawyer has the originals." Gregory looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the powerful patriarch. I saw a small, frightened man who had been caught in his own trap. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The room remained frozen for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the crackling of the fireplace, a sound that now seemed aggressive and mocking. I stood in the center of the living room, smoothing the hem of my sweater, feeling a strange, hollow sense of peace. I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I had expected. I just felt finished. How could you? Brenda finally gasped, her hands clutching at the collar of her robe. After everything we've done for you, to take advantage of a misunderstanding like this? To humiliate your father in his own home? It wasn't a misunderstanding, Mom, I said, my voice steady. It was a crime. He stole my identity. He used my life as a piggy bank for Bianca's failures. And this isn't his home anymore. It's mine. The bank made sure of that. Cassidy, please, Gregory finally managed to say, his voice thick and shaky. We can fix this. We'll pay you back. We'll sign whatever you want. Just don't do this. Not at Christmas. You didn't mind doing this at Christmas last year when you gave me an insult in an envelope while Bianca got a house spot with my debt, I said. You've had 28 years to fix this. You chose not to. I looked at Bianca, who was still staring at the deed as if it were a foreign object. And you, I said. You didn't know, did you? You didn't know that every gift they gave you is stolen from me. Or maybe you just didn't want to know. Bianca didn't answer. She just looked away, her face flushing a deep, guilty red. I walked over to the hall closet and pulled out my coat. The air in the house was suffocating now, heavy with the weight of the lies that had finally been dragged into the light. I didn't need to stay for the fallout. I didn't need to hear their excuses or their pleas. I won't be sharing the lake house, I said, my hand on the brass door handle. I'll be moving in next week. I expect the keys to be left on the kitchen counter by Friday. And if I hear one word about a legal challenge, my lawyer will be taking those forged signatures to the district attorney. Just so we're clear. I opened the door. The cold December air rushed in, sharp and honest. It hit my face like a benediction. I stepped out onto the porch, the snow crunching under my boots. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. By evening, I was at the lake house. My lake house. I sat in the old armchair by the window, a blanket draped over my shoulders, watching the snow fall in slow, steady flakes over the dark water. The house was quiet. No music, no performative laughter, no burnt cinnamon rolls. I realized then that I didn't really want the house. I didn't want the status or the legacy. But I needed them to know that I could take it. I needed to prove that the girl they ignored was the only one who could save them, and the only one who had the strength to walk away. The snow kept falling, coating the world in a clean, silent white. I sat in the dark, watching the edges of the lake disappear, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone else to tell me who I was. My phone has been blowing up for days. My mother left voicemails sobbing, saying I destroyed the family legacy over a misunderstanding. My sister called me a sociopath for stealing their safe haven. Even some extended relatives are telling me I went too far and should just sign the house back over to keep the peace. So, tell me, am I the jerk for legally buying the family property and refusing to give it back after they stole my identity? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Drop your verdict in the comments below. I read every single one of them. See you in the next video.